Hello and welcome to ACT Prep. I am your English teacher, Miss Abear. You probably notice a little bit of a difference with my voice. I'm a little under the weather. That is an expression, and we will talk about expressions later on in our ACT English Prep because expressions are sayings that we have that mean specific things. Well, I will tell you that ACT is really careful about being culturally appropriate and thinking about sayings and expressions like that that may not be very well known. So they try to find passages that don't contain either very many of those types of expressions, or if they use those expressions, then it's easy for someone who might not be familiar with that expression to understand it. So that being said, I hope that you can understand me today as we review that practice test that you guys took the last time that we were together. So today we are going to be looking at the answers for the entire passage or the entire test that you guys took, and there were 5 passages. So every day this week we are going to look at one of those 5 passages. Today we're going to look at passage 1, and then the next time we meet we'll go over 2, 3, 4, and 5 until we've gone over this entire test. Now, I hope that you will not get frustrated because we're going to be working within this test probably for several weeks, because it's important that you really dig deep and understand the concepts that we're talking about in order to be prepared for success on the ACT test, specifically that ACT English test. So here are the answers for the test that you guys took the last time we were together. I'm going to come out of the scene so that your teacher can pause on this and you can mark the answers on your answer document that you got incorrect. So I'm going to pause for a minute, mark your answers, and make sure that you're ready to work with me when we come back together. All right, I am excited to see how you guys did on this test. And we're going to, the rest of today, as we're going through passage 1, I'm going to be helping you understand why these answers are remember we said they're not correct answers, they're the best answers. And so there may be times where you're like, that just doesn't make any sense to me because it should be this. And while it could be the answer that you had, the best response is the one that ACT chose for you. So without further ado, get your test out, have your passages there, have your answer documents, and let's go through and let's justify these responses. Okay, so for passage 1, we're going to be chunking this text. We're going to be chunking these passages. So let's look at question 1 or item number 1. So item number 1 does not even give you a question stem. It just gives you some possible changes that you can make to that underlined part. So you've got for over 40 years, Laurie Anderson has appropriated electronics, videos, and sound to create art that defies categorization. And the best answer is D, sound to create. Best answer is D because it does not include any unnecessary punctuation. And so if you look at those other responses or those other choices, there's a lot of extra punctuation. And sometimes we like to add commas where commas aren't needed because we're like, I need to take a breath. Well, just because you need to take a breath does not mean that a comma is appropriate in those places. We've gotten either one side of the coin has gotten overpopulated with commas, and the other side of the coin is like, I don't use any punctuation. And so the ACT wants to make sure that you're using punctuation appropriately. So the answer to that question is D, because it does not include any unnecessary punctuation. All right, let's look at 2. 2, again, there is no question stem. Anderson ignited her career by conducting a symphony using only her car horn. Now, if you look at the beginning of that sentence, It says in 1972. In 1972 is telling when, and it is a prepositional phrase telling when. So that part we can even take out completely. Anderson ignited her career. Okay, that is a complete sentence on its own. So then we look at the next piece is by conducting a symphony using only car horns. Well, there's a semicolon here, and so the semicolon will indicate that there's a complete sentence afterwards. Well, that by conducting a symphony using only car horns is not a complete sentence. So if you look at your answer choices, the best answer is J. Anderson ignited her career. No punctuation. Again, it's the only option that is structurally sound and avoids creating a sentence fragment. Right now you have a fragment. We're going to dig deeper into these as we continue working through this ACT passage, but we're just justifying these responses. All right, for number 3, again, no question stem. The best answer is C, because the word doubles is precise and appropriately conveys how the violin can be used both as a violin and as an audio tape player. Let's also look at number 4. Number 4, again, no question stem, just an underlined portion asking, okay, which part is going to be the best answer? And the best answer is F. You don't need a change there. The verb invert is parallel in structure to the verbs in the preceding phrases. We're going to talk about parallel structure as we dig into the different item types. Right now, we're just reviewing these answers and telling why they are correct. I say correct, I use that word again, and you know we're not supposed to use the word correct, is the best answer choice. We should not put any changes in question number 4. All right, let's look at the next chunk of questions, 5, 6, and 7. For number 5, the best answer is A, because it provides the most effective transition between Anderson's childhood interest and her witnessing major achievements in space travel and artificial intelligence later in life. I'm not going to read these passages to you because you've already read those passages. If your teacher in your classroom wants to read them out loud to you, he or she is welcome to do that. I don't think it's necessary to justify the responses or for you to be writing down the justifications for these responses. Later in later weeks, we're going to be talking about, or later lessons, we're going to be talking about these different item types and digging a little bit further into why questions stem or why the answer choices are the best choices and why the others are not good answer choices. And so again, I told you we're going to be working with this passage over and over again for several weeks. Or several lessons per se. Some of you might go through several of my lessons in one day. Some of you may only go through one lesson a day. But just know that we're going to be going through these for quite a while so we can really dig deep and understand the ins and outs of why these choices are the most appropriate choice for ACT and for your grammatical purposes. Speaking of grammatical purposes, I don't know if you see behind me some of these anchor charts that I have. I'm hoping that your teacher has some anchor charts, especially for punctuation in his or her classroom. It's really important for you to understand those punctuation rules. And remember, in some of my previous lessons, I talked about No Red Ink being a really good resource for understanding punctuation and those punctuation rules. As you know, the majority of the English ACT test is going to be punctuation. Now, there are other, obviously, other portions that are in here, but punctuation has the number one question numbers, how many on the test are the highest percentage. All right, let's keep going. I got off task. That's quick and easy for me to do. I want to go back to question 5 because it actually does have a question. So the question says, which choice provides the most effective transition from the first 2 sentences of the paragraph to the rest of the paragraph. And remember I said A, there's no change. There's no change that was necessary because it is already an effective transition. You need to understand those effective transitions. That is necessary in your own writing. Again, let's look at questions 6 and 7. 6 and 7 do not have a question stem. It just has some answer choices. 6, the best answer is F, because it maintains the overall style and tone of the essay. I want to look at that for a second, because let's look at 6. It says, during a visit to a virtual airport control center, Anderson viewed panoramic images of the red planet. And I'm going to stop there because that's a good kind of ending place for us to understand kind of all these other choices. There is no punctuation in Anderson viewed panoramic images. So we looked at that and we know that that is the correct answer, or that is the best answer. Let's look at some of these others and see how they change the style or tone of the passage. So if we look at answer choice G, it says, eyeballed all-encompassing snapshots. Well, snapshots and that all-encompassing are different words that would work, but they're not words that follow that that domain-specific vocabulary. And so we want to make sure that we're following the same style that the rest of the passage indicates. H uses the word beheld. Beheld is more of a literary term and less of a term that really helps us understand the science behind, and it's more, it's not a one that scientists use a lot. Lastly is the word ogled. She ogled comprehensive photographs. While photographs is a synonym of the word images, images, panoramic, and viewed are more simplistic terms that really help maintain that style and tone of the rest of the passage. And so if you look at the passage as a whole and what you've read up until this point, you will understand that we're not going to be making a lot of changes. And it may be that this is one that you go back to when you finish your passage and you say, oh, well, that's easy to see now that I finished the passage, that this particular sentence, the way it's written, maintains that style and tone of the rest of the passage. So that might be something for you to think about on these that ask about style and tone of the whole passage. You may want to finish, kind of mark, and come back to that if you have time. All right, lastly was number 7. The best answer is C, because the words of and by are the most idiomatically correct preposition in context and give the clearest and most precise description of how the video feed was provided by the satellite. Now, I want you to look at the answer choice 7, or actually the ellipsis at the end of 7. There's more information that could have been put there. An ellipsis is not something that ACT is going to ask you about. They're never going to put an ellipsis in a passage and ask you about whether or not it is appropriate in that piece. Not on the ACT English, and I don't believe on the ACT reading either. An ellipsis is not a punctuation mark that you need to be exceptionally familiar with in order to find success on the English ACT. All right, are we ready to continue? I wanted to tell you before we continue that the next passage you're going to be justifying those responses with a small group. And so be thinking about how I'm helping you justify these best responses, so that when you get ready to work with your team and with a group, then you know what's expected of you. You're going to have to say, this is the correct or the best answer, and this is the best answer because. Why is that the best answer choice the best answer choice? And sometimes that means you've got to look at all of the other responses in order to say, no, those are not right, and be able to articulate why it is that these are the best choices. All right, let's continue to look at numbers 8 and 9. Both 8 and 9 have a question stem, so let's dissect those. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined portion would not be acceptable? I'm gonna take a breath. Because guys, I do not like that, the way that question is asked. I don't like when test questions say, okay, which answer is not correct. It's easier to find the best response than it is the worst response sometimes. And so be aware when you see the word not. And notice that it is in all caps. So ACT does that because they understand that sometimes that will confuse a person and they want to make sure that you're not confused. So anytime that you need to eliminate an answer and say that this is the only unacceptable answer, they're going to capitalize and put it in all caps, the word not. So let's look at the one that would not be acceptable. The best answer is J because it inserts a semicolon after the word stage. Semicolons should only be used to connect two independent clauses. What comes after the semicolon is not an independent clause, but a participle phrase. That makes J the only alternative that is not acceptable. Okay. Then it says number 9, again, we have a good sentence stem. It says, at this point, the writer is considering adding the following true sentence. Neil Armstrong was the first man to be photographed walking on the moon's surface. Now here's the question. Should the writer make this addition at this location? Notice that the 9 comes after at the end of this passage. That is where they're asking, should that sentence be included? Well, the best answer is C. That sentence is not relevant to the paragraph's description and interpretation of the end of the moon. Okay, so would these others be appropriate to add? Maybe, maybe not. You remember when I talked in a previous lesson about when you go in and you do peer reviews with your classmates when you guys write essays, and sometimes you got to go in and go, why is this here? Why did you say this here? It doesn't even make sense in this place in the essay. That is what they're asking you here. Should this be added or should it not? If the essayist had included it in the original essay as a peer review person, as an editor, you would want to go in and strike that statement because it doesn't fit and it's not an appropriate place. Now, would it fit more appropriately somewhere else? I don't know. I haven't finished reading the essay at this point, or I haven't finished reading the passage at this point. But at this time and in this place, it's not the best because it's not directly relevant. It's irrelevant, okay? Let's continue. Just have a couple more questions in this passage. Questions 10 through 12, none of those have question 12 does have a sentence stem or a question stem, so let's look at that. So number 10 first, the best answer is F. It does not include any unnecessary punctuation. We're going back to that unnecessary and necessary punctuation. Number 11, the best answer is B because it's the only option that's clear and avoids using vague or ambiguous pronouns. Oh, I can't wait till we talk about pronouns. Some of you are terrible when you're telling a story and you use this vague pronoun, and I don't know who you're talking about. You could be talking about, your story could include the school principal, a teacher, one of your buddies, and maybe the janitor. And you use the word he. Well, 3 of those 4 that you've described are he's. They're guys. So how do I know which he you're referring to? That is a vague or ambiguous pronoun. So we're going to be talking about those later on, and I'm hoping that when we dig into pronouns a little bit better or a little bit more, you're going to get better with your everyday speech as well when you're telling stories to people. So keep that one in mind. Number 11 is, again, no question stem. The best answer is B. All right, let's look at question 12. Question 12 actually gives you a question. Which choice provides the most vivid description of Anderson's action. The best response there is F, because it provides the clearest and most vivid information. All right, I want to talk about that for a second. Vivid information. If I tell you that it snowed yesterday, that is very basic. You know that it snowed. But if I said the snow came down in ribbons as if it was falling into these streams of flurries, not just, or I could say the snow was falling like the stars at night. I'm using these similes and metaphors as ways to describe the way the snow was falling. Or I could say the snow was so deep that it covered my dog's bowl. Well, do I have a big dog or do I have a little dog? Does my dog eat a lot at one time or a little at one time? How big is that bowl? Well, if the bowl is a 4-inch bowl, then you know that the snow covered that bowl completely. So we had at least 4 inches of snow, probably more if it completely covered the bowl. So when you think about that vivid and precise language, I want you to be thinking about how you, when you're describing something, that most vivid description. Not just that it snowed, but how much did it snow? What did it look like? How was it falling? Think about all of those questions when you think about being vivid in your description. All right, let's continue. Number 13 and 14. Again, we don't have a question stem. We just have what's the best response here. For question 13, the best answer is B. It's the only option that creates the correct sentence structure. It creates a complete sentence. And so be looking at that, and we're going to be digging more into a complete sentence and an incomplete sentence, or sentence fragments and sentence run-ons. We're going to be digging deeper into those further into our lessons. Number 14, the correct response is B. It's the only option that creates correct sentence structure. You have 2 sentence structures in a row. Notice that for number 14, the best answer is B. Y'all, I was wrong on that one. I'm just going to be completely honest, because B isn't even an answer choice. So let's look at that together. All right, 14. The result is surreal and stimulating, exactly what you might expect from NASA's inaugural artist in residence. Okay, so it gives us the option of F, no change. The result is surreal and stimulating. You feel like you need some kind of pause there, don't you? Okay. So then we go to, let's look at G. G uses a colon and the word and. Well, we know that a colon means that you're going to put some type of list after. And so we have the word and. And is a conjunction, so we wouldn't put a conjunction after a colon, because that wouldn't, they're not listing anything. So we know G is not the correct the best answer. So let's look at H. Stimulating, and then they use a dash. Exactly what you might expect from NASA's inaugural artist in residence. What does a dash do? A dash separates information, and it basically describes the information before. Well, let's see if that's what this second part is doing. So the result is surreal and stimulating. Okay, so if we cut that off and put a dash, exactly what? We're looking at this. We don't use the exactly, because the exactly is part of the underlined portion. So they're taking that completely out. So the result is surreal and stimulating, dash. What you might expect from NASA's inaugural artist in residence. Okay, that's pretty good. That, I'm thinking, might be it, H. So then let's look at J. J says that there should be a semicolon after stimulating, and then what you might expect from NASA's inaugural artist in residence. Well, the problem with that is there's no there's not a complete sentence after the semicolon. What you might expect from NASA's inaugural artist in residence is not a complete sentence. It doesn't have a subject and a verb and make a complete thought. So we know the answer is not J. So the best answer is H, because the information after the word stimulating is describing this result. And what that result is, that surreal and stimulating result. And when they're looking at surreal and stimulating, those are very descriptive words, but then they're saying more information about it being stimulating and surreal is that it's exactly what you expect from NASA. So that just adds more information and more description to that other part of the sentence. So the best answer there is H. And so we'll get more into that when we dig deeper in the test. But guys, we as teachers, we make mistakes, and I apologize for this one on my screen. So hopefully you guys can forgive me for that piece. And we're going to move on. So let's look at, we should be getting really close to the end of course, my clicker decides it doesn't want to work. We're getting to the end of this passage. We have one question left, if I can get my... There we go. The last question on these passages usually will ask something about the entire passage. Most of the time they do, but not all the time. So the last question of this, on this passage 1, gives an exact question. The writer is considering adding the following sentence to the essay. Her talking stick, for instance, was a 6-foot-long baton that could record and replicate sounds. If the writer were to add this sentence, it would most logically be placed at point A in paragraph 1, point B in paragraph 1, point C in paragraph 1, or point D in paragraph 2. So I want you to notice as you were reading through your passage, you would see your questions are these underlined portions, but sometimes you would see this A, B, C, and D. D is over here. And so you would see those and you're like, well, what does that have to do with my whole essay? Because I don't see any A, B, C, D in my answer choices and it's not underlined. Well, you're going to know that when you see that, you're going to have a question at the end of your passage that's going to be very specific about probably adding some information. And so make note of that in your brain that, okay, is this missing information or what? And so be ready to justify that piece on that last question of the last question in that sequence. Boy, that was a mouthful for me to get out. All right, so what is the best answer? The best answer is B, because Anderson's talking stick provides a clear and relevant example that supports the claim that Anderson invented tools that manipulated sound. So that would be point B in paragraph 1. So it wouldn't go here with A, but it would go here in B. It just adds information to the rest of that sentence. Okay, now we have completed passage 1 and justifying these responses. Now, you can go in for passage 2 with a partner or with a small group. I suggest a small group, but that's up to the teacher in your classroom. But you can just say what the best answer is and why it's the best answer. Your group may need to discuss why some of those other answers are not the best answer. And I would keep some notes. You need to be able to have those notes of justifying why an answer is the best answer and why it's not. So I don't know how long this should take you. I don't think it should take you 15, 20, 30 minutes, depending on how many of you are working together and how you're working together. I'm not going to even give you suggestions on who should have what roles in those groups, but the teacher in your classroom may have some ideas on how you should work together as a group. But here's one thing I am going to caution you on. Do not look to the person who had the most correct answers to begin with to be in your group. and to give you all of the answers. Because if you're not going back and justifying them on your own, you're going to have a lot of difficulty the further we get into these lessons, because just so you know, later on with this same passage, and I'm not going to tell you which passages they are, you are going to have to justify these responses on your own. And yes, I'm going to go over them with you, but you need to be able to justify these responses on your own. So get with a group and y'all figure these out together, and I'm going to trust that you do that. And this is going to be for passage 2, questions 16 through 30. Know that you have those correct answers, or those best answers. For earlier in my PowerPoint, you guys can go back. You should have written those down, and your teacher should have a copy of that as well. Until next time, happy learning.